Hey everyone, it's Vito from MoreBeer, and on this episode of The Mashup, we're in San Francisco, California at Barebottle Brewing, and we're sitting with Lester and Magic, and we're gonna talk Mexican lagers and a bunch of other stuff. Thanks guys for having us. Love you guys, love everything you do. Beer, wine, kombucha, coffee. Tell us a little bit, soda as well. I mean, you guys, you do everything like more beer, more flavor. So
we buy so much from MoreBeer.
Thank you. Yeah,
you guys have what we need.
So stoked to be here. Tell us a little bit about Barebottle. From the roots. How I met you guys is the homebrewing tie-in. You guys you put the recipe on the can. I love it. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, so starting Barebottle back in 2016, so we're like 5 years old now. And it all started from homebrewing roots. We're all the founders, myself, Mike, and Ben. We're all kind of homebrew buddies back from school, and kind of got deeper in the rabbit hole, like as everyone kind of eventually does on the beer side, the homebrew side, is you start entering competitions. And you're like, well, what happens in competitions? Well, let me just figure out how to be a judge, and you become a judge. And then you really start like heading down that rabbit hole, And like once you're down that rabbit hole, you realize like there's all these other like pathways and doors and exciting things that happen in beer, and you just kind of get so engulfed by it that you're just like I want to make this a career, So we kind of started kicking around business plans and ideas, and then had enough traction there, started to raise money from friends and family, and then we just figured, if we're not going to do this now in our life's only going to get more complicated. You're only going to get more indebted to like the objects in your life. So like if you don't do it now, then we may never do it. And that like element of regret was something that none of us wanted to kind of live the rest of our lives with. So kind of jumped in. A lot of the beers that we started with were homebrew recipes of ours. But also like kind of carrying through what what homebrewing has meant to us. That idea of putting the label, the recipe, the full recipe on the side of the cans or the bottles. Just the name Barebottle is an homage to homebrewing. You remember it. We all remember, right? It's like before cans were everywhere, right? Bottles were everywhere. Like that's how we like packaged our beer if it wasn't on draft in our house. And like you never wanted to show up at a party or go into a friend's house, and all of like your hard effort beer is in like a Bud Light bottle, like nobody wanted that, so we always looked for bare empty bottles, these blank bottles. So like Sierra Nevada was great, like they were always like bare empty bottles, but
bare bottle, that's the vessel for your creation, so I love
and
that.
Also like doing a lot of homebrew competitions, so we kind of did more in the beginning, then it's gotten more and more complicated, but we always try to do at least 1 or 2 a year.
And that's how I met you guys, was with the homebrew competition, and then brewing here, and that was great. I love that you guys do that. You actually have a homebrew club that used to meet here, or they still do?
Oh, they still do.
Yeah, San Francisco Homebrewers Guild, right?
I'm a lifetime member. I have a lifetime membership card.
So, John, tell us a little bit about your brewing history, how you came here and all that.
So I'm actually from Los Angeles, and after college did mechanical engineering, did that for a few years, and just, was a young kid with way too much time to burn. But started getting into, I always liked things that tasted better. I remember in college always having a fridge full of Guinness, actually. And, graduating, finding Stone, like I remember my first Arrogant Bastard, and making a trip down to San Diego. It wasn't beer related, but on the way back we stopped at Stone and was blown away by that massive, beautiful garden they have there and the tap room.
And the fake frogs house.
And the fake frogs house in the parking lot. But sitting down at the bar, and the bar manager, I thought I knew everything about IPAs. And he's like, "You ever have a Saison?" I'm like, "What's that?" And he pours me a DuPont. And I was like,
"Oh, that's a good first Saison to have."
That blew my mind. And from that point forward, I was just always searching for cool, better beers. And in Los Angeles at the time, breweries weren't necessarily that abundant as they are now.
What is at the time?
Yeah, give us a time
2010, 2011, I think, around there.
Just when the beer scene started
I mean, Eagle Rock Brewing was like the only thing around in LA proper. Orange County had its whole thing, so I would make plenty of drives down there. And then, going back to San Diego, Pizza Port, Lost Abbey, Port. Those were the breweries that like I was drinking a ton of and like loved the bitter IPAs. But I never even thought about making it until I was at a friend's house, and on my way out, he was like, "Oh yeah, you like beer," and he gave me a 6-pack. He's like, "I made these." I was like, "What? You can make this?"
Yeah.
It didn't never cross my mind. Went home that day and just, did a bunch of research, bought a homebrew kit, and it was for an Oktoberfest, which looking back now, it was an ale yeast. I remember that specifically. The beer was okay, it was fine, did the whole thing, right? And then just kind of kept doing it, went down a rabbit hole until the first beer that I made, it was a Kolsch, and I remember making it because the recipe was easy, and I forgot about it in my garage. And then when I came back to it, like 5 weeks later, I was like, oops, I guess I should still bottle this, and it was fantastic. And that just took me down this rabbit hole of learning and trying to do this.
You guys put the recipe on the beer can, which I love, and not just the recipe, but a 5-gallon batch. Perfect for homebrewers. Tell us why you do that. Because a lot of people, I don't want to share my recipe, but you guys are obviously sharing every recipe, and I love that. Tell us why you do that, and
Yeah, I mean, I think it's several-fold. One goes back to the homebrewing ethos, right? We're homebrewers, and we want to be able to grow the pie, right? So, like, our number one thing, and I mean, even when we get emails about it now, it's so, like, heartening to see somebody, like, I drank this beer, I love it, I want to brew it myself. Like, if you're getting more homebrewers to brew beer, like, I think as an industry, we're winning, because then they're going to really understand, how flavors and beers are derived and what they can do, and it just kind of opens the door to, greater beer appreciation. So, the vision was like, hey, like, let's just put it on the label, because one, like, when we first started making beer, like, we get a lot of people emailing us, calling us, saying, hey, we love this beer, we're trying to make it, like, can you give us some tips on, how to make it? And we would just literally, like, take a picture of the recipe sheet or take a picture of the brew log and just send it to them. And we're like, well, why don't we just take that and just formalize it and put it on the label, so that way, like, if they want to make it, like, they have all the information there. It's that, but it's also, like, even if you're not a home brewer, you really want to, I feel like, to get greater beer appreciation, if you're able to empower your palate, empower your mind on what flavors you like, because we throw all these like hop names and all these malts around, right? Viking Pilsner, name your hop Galaxy or Strata or whatever, but you don't, like, maybe you don't know, like, every beer has a hop combination, and you're like, well, I don't know if what I'm tasting is Strata, is it Mosaic, is it the Citra, but if you're able to, like, give everybody the laundry list of everything in here, they can drink it and they can see, like, oh, like, everything that I have that has the Strata hop in there, I really enjoy. And so now, like, how much more empowered they are when they go anywhere. They walk into, another brewery or a bar or a restaurant and say, oh, I love the Citra hop, I love Galaxy hops, I love Strata hops. And, like, that, on the serving side for us is so much easier when we have some information on what people's tastes are like.
Help educate the
and
public.
To be able to, like, give them what they like,
Yeah.
So it's an educational component as well.
That makes sense, and I'm glad you mentioned the association of building that, because, like, going through BGCP and learning off flavors, right? It's all about association, and you douse that beer with diacetyl or whatever it is, and then you start to learn at a high levels, and then you tailor it back, and that's how you learn that association of that. So that makes total sense to me, of, like, learning what Citra tastes like. Okay, I like Citra, things like that. So that makes total sense. The other thing I love that you said, and I think is great, and what is so unique to me about the brewing industry is, sharing, right? And what other industry do you see that sharing and collaboration? Like, breweries go and do collaborations together. Restaurants don't do that. No one does that. And I just love that sharing and, like, hey, here's how I made this. Being able to do that. So that's
I think, one of the biggest unique sellers of this industry is, like, I'm 100% in agreement with you. Like, there are very few industries where you can jump on a message board, which we have, in the Bay Area for all the brewers, and they say, hey, like, my yeast crapped out, or I thought I had this malt, but I don't. Can someone please spare, like, X amount of bags of this? And, like, within minutes, right? They're like, hey, like, I'm in Pacifica, or I'm in, Monterey, but you're in the city, like, I can drive it to you, or I got somebody in the area, you want to pick it up, or whatever. And, like, that, to me, is, like, I think why this industry attracts so many people from other kind of walks of life, is because there is that sense of community, you know?
Yes.
I mean, you know, we make coffee, we make wine, and there is not that community in those other beverages in the Bay Area. Like, it is very, very unique, you know, to beer, and I feel like a lot of it maybe stems from, you know, the home brewing ethos, right? It's like when you homebrew, it's like, hey, like, I'd rather not be by myself in my garage making this. I'd rather have some friends brew with me. And then everyone comes together, and it's like this, you know, this like communal meal where everyone gets to like share in the making and share in the end product. And I feel like that kind of carries its way through the professional side of the industry. And, you know, I hope that's the major element that we never lose in this industry.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing your recipes with the public. That's awesome. I love everything you guys do.
We spent a lot of time on scaling it down, going back and forth, making label changes.
I answered an email this morning about it.
But you know, it's kind of what we do, you know, at Barebottle is, you know, we don't do just a single model of this is the IPA that we make, this is our flagship. Like, we have no flagship. We love the idea of experimenting and changing and making new beers and new recipes and new ideas, new techniques, you know, because as Magic mentioned, like, that's how we grow, like, that's how we get better. And if we're not like constantly like pushing, trying, failing every now and then we're not moving forward fast enough.
I'm glad you mentioned flagships. Let's talk about that for a second. You know, in the last couple of years, you've heard the term flagships are dead, right? And it's always been like, what have you done for me lately? I think the public's like, new. But I feel like it's starting to come back around to flagships. What's your take on that?
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't think that's true necessarily for IPAs. I still think the people who are drinking the kinds of IPAs we're making are very adventurous, and they're always looking for new hops, new flavors, even if they
New
just
beer
want,
to check in on Untappd.
even if it's just for that. However, for lagers, I do think there is something to that, where if you think about the breweries that are becoming very popular for making even craft lagers, it's because they're making that one lager and they're making it really well, or one or two, and then when they release another one, it's like, oh man, look at that thing. We treat our lagers like we do our IPA, so we're always constantly making new things, and I don't think the Bay Area knows that we're making as many, and I think the quality lagers that we are making, partially because we're just doing this rotation thing, which is cool. I'm fine with that. Like, we get to drink cool new lagers all the time, but I do think that maybe in flagships and those non-IPA brands I can see where people want to go back to those.
That's a good point. Like, I feel like, because, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, like, there's so much evolution happening in especially like IPAs, right? Because IPAs are really like, that is the driving style of the craft beer industry, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much evolution that's happening with the hops, you know, with the enzymes, with the techniques, that it's almost like it's evolving so fast that if you were just like, I'm only going to drink this one IPA when I go to a bar and nothing else, like, you were getting left behind in terms of like what is happening. And I think that's what's exciting for a consumer, is like, you're able to like see like in real time, you know, the evolution of IPA, like, as you talked about, like, there's so much changing right now. And like, we're in this like really weird kind of moment of time where it's just like this explosion of like technique change, and like, I don't think we've seen like this much change happening, you know, the last couple of years and for the next 2 years moving forward than we have seen in the last decade. And like, that's why it's exciting for the consumer to walk in and be in that rotational mindset of like, let me try something new, because they're all so different, and you're able to see the differences. I think that's the key, is if you're able to see and taste the difference, then you're able to then like appreciate like, oh, like, maybe I shouldn't just drink this because there's so many things I haven't even experienced yet, and I won't experience until I try them new. And I feel like that whole like experiential mindset, especially on IPAs, as you mentioned, like, that's, you know, that's going to be a huge driving force of craft beer for the next decade.
Yep.
Yeah, it's exciting. So let's dive into the beer that we're going to talk about, Torcido, the Mexican lager. So let's start with, what makes a Mexican lager a Mexican lager? How is it different than a Vienna or a German Pilsner? Tell me a little bit about that.
So, it's funny because when researching to make this beer in particular, I actually bought as many lager books as I could. And the Mexican lager section is always about a paragraph that gets summed down to Mexican lagers exist. They don't go deep into the history of how lagers were even brought to Mexico. There was an Austrian emperor named Maximilian I, and he was emperor of Mexico for a while.
Oh, wow.
And he came and brought a ton of Austrian and German beers, and that didn't last very long, but the beer stayed. And who doesn't want a crispy German lager, in the heat of Mexico in that weather? But what you get is very, very soft water in Mexico, so you get these really pretty soft beers. Bitterness isn't really a showcase, and I do think people associate corn as part of one of the ingredients in Mexican lagers, and yeah, we use corn in this beer, especially to lighten up the body. But it's really a very well-crafted, but you're not skimping on ingredients, lager that is just extremely dry and crispy to drink. So the idea for Torcido as a beer in general came from us having just started our lager program, and we were making a bunch of beautiful pilsners and German pilsners, Munich pilsners, just like bitter, crisp, super flavorful, hoppy beers. And while they were really good, sometimes at the end of the day after a long shift, you kind of just want something that you don't even have to think about. And so we were also making a Kolsch at the time, and it was getting really complicated in our schedule to keep multiple yeast strains alive. So the idea is like, why don't we make a lighter style lager? But I didn't want to make an American Pilsner, so decided to make a Mexican Pilsner. One of the beers we had at the time was a parallel Pilsner. We also had perpendicular Pilsner, which was a dark lager. So I thought, all right, this is going to be a twist off of those. It's neither really. It's kind of diagonal, or twisted. And Torcido means twisted in Spanish, so we named the beer Torcido to kind of play off of, it's not either of those two beers, it's something in between.
Okay, that makes sense. So you won a GABF medal with that. What was that like? Tell us about, that you were there for it.
I was not there.
Okay.
I went the year before, and Kelsey, one of our other co-head brewers here, she went, but I was watching it live on TV. It was like a Saturday at 10 a.m., and I remember the category coming up, and it was like bronze went by, silver went by, and I was like, okay, I almost got up to like go get something to drink. And then the name came up, and I just couldn't believe it. It was super incredible, just awesome. Not because it was just this beer in general, but it's, I've been to GABF so many times, and to be able to win an award there, it's just really validating that we're doing something cool here at the brewery.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's a huge honor.
I think I was cutting the grass at the time.
Were you cutting the grass? You weren't there either? Okay. Yeah. Congratulations on that. Let's talk about Viking Malt, because I know Viking Malt was the base malt for that. And you guys won the award with it. We'll dig into the Viking helmet and all that kind of stuff here in a minute. But yeah, I think talk to us about using Viking Malt. When I started to work with MoreBeer, we were just getting ready to bring that malt in. And then our relationship, I think we did a pilot batch, a homebrew batch, which I think our video is still on our Instagram of us mashing in with that one, which is a cool one. Go check that out.
What did we brew with that first pilot
That was
batch?
the cookie malt. That was the cookie malt. Remember that?
Right.
The cookie malt? What do we call that beer? I forget. Something Cookie Monster. I don't know.
Yeah, something like that.
It was fun, yeah.
Milk and cookies.
Milk and cookies, that was it, yeah. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about Viking Malt, using that before we dig into the ingredients of
Right.
Torcido.
So, well, they kind of go hand in hand. So Torcido, I wanted to make it a nice crispy beer, twisted off of our other beers. And my first malt choice was a Bohemian floor malted Pilsner. Way too much character. It was like a nice, pretty beer, really toasty. And I was like, nah, this is not what we need. We need something cleaner. And then you had mentioned that you were bringing a Pilsner malt. And I remember you bringing a sample in. I was like, this is crispy. It's, it's like a very crackery without a ton of flavor. Not to say that it's bad. It's just, it's very clean and straightforward.
Blank, yeah.
It's a very good blank canvas. So we made the beer with that, and it was incredible. It was extremely light. We ended up adding a bag of Carahel because it helped, just to help bolster the body and sweetness, and just to give it a little bit of something that just 100% Viking Pils would be almost too clean of a beer. Not that we haven't done that, but just this beer needed a little bit more, and of course some corn.
So did you guys brew Torcido before the Viking Malt? I know the Viking Malt is the one that won the gold at GABF.
I think that was our third batch maybe of the Torcido.
Gotcha,
Second or
okay.
third batch. So yes.
So you'd say Viking Malt is what won the gold medal?
Viking Malt was definitely the right malt for this beer.
Yeah.
Or the Viking Pilsner. It's I don't even think the extra pale pills from Wireman that's almost too light. Wireman has character, and it's, we play a lot around with different Pilsner malts, just trying to find out, just trying to learn what's cool, what's out there. But, sometimes you hit like the nail on the head, and it's like, that malt is a perfect application for this.
That's awesome. Congrats again on the GABF medal. So you guys started using the Viking Malt. You guys are actually what inspired us to start the Viking, the Hall of Fame Viking Malt program. So we gave you guys the Viking helmet and some other good stuff.
I don't know if we inspired you guys so much as, we're just like, hey man, had we used somebody else's malt, we get these kind of gifts. What's going on with you guys?
And I'll say it, we the red overalls, that was kind of, it was like, which I would, as a brewer too, I thought that was like really cool to have some type of competition. You win with this malt, you get some. So to work together on that and to launch that program together, I think was pretty cool.
Yep.
And it was special. Great, love working with you guys, and doing that was amazing. So congrats on being the first Vikings in the Viking Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get a couple more.
Exactly. Yeah. Once you did that, we made the MoreBeer kit, and that's just been great. It's people love that recipe. The reviews on it have been amazing. Awesome. Thanks again for sharing that. I know you share all your recipes, but sharing that one with us. Just wanted to thank you guys and love that Torcido kit.
Yeah.
Let's jump into the recipe now. Let's talk about the ingredients, the yeast, all that. I know we have the kit, but let's tell everybody about the ingredients of that.
So the recipe is pretty simple and straightforward. As we mentioned before, the base malt is Viking Pilsner, and then a little bit of Carahel. I think it's like 2%, and also flaked corn, somewhere between. I think it's just right around 10%. Flaked corn. Flaked corn has been an interesting one because it definitely, if not used properly, if not fully converted or mashed to its entirety, it will provide more body than you actually want. It does the opposite of you making it dry, is what we've learned recently. So we've messed around with using enzymes to try to get it even drier, and seems to work. And the beer is as delicious as it's ever been. So just something to keep in mind when using corn or rice, just like flaked oats or other adjuncts, except that rice and corn just gelatinize at different temperatures. As for hops, there is Crystal, American Crystal at 60 minutes. Crystal was one of my favorite hops, or noble-ish hops as a homebrewer. It's a little more floral and citrusy without a ton of spice. But then I do add saws at 10 minutes because I do think that little bit of spice in these beers, in these really light, crispy lagers, it's not nostalgic, it's just we're all used to that character and we all kind of want a little bit of that.
Sure.
It helps drive that bite, that crispiness, that dryness on the very finish. So you just kind of get a little bit of both sides, American and noble character. As for yeast, soft lager 3470, it's our bread and butter here. If it's super hearty, ferments really quickly. We actually ferment this beer at 65 degrees.
Oh, interesting.
So it's at the higher end of, if not the high end of what Fermentus recommends for that yeast.
Still doing a de-rest and all that.
Still doing a de-rest. You can go through the entire fermentation. That yeast fermented warm acts extremely quickly.
On the yeast, that was one thing that, when I heard you guys won the gold medal, we talked about the yeast, and it was dry yeast. To me, I think a lot of homebrewers like liquid yeast is kind of what we're all raised on or whatever. But then talking to a lot of commercial brewers, like dry yeast is a thing, and I at the brewery love it as well. So tell me, you guys use a lot of dry yeast, or what's your take on that, dry versus liquid?
We use a ton of dry yeast. We use both. It really comes down to what we think is best for the beer, and also just production constraints. Being able to keep some dry yeast bricks on hand for when our schedule changes is awesome. If we plan ahead, we'll absolutely buy liquid yeast of certain things, but of the bread and butter, of our Chico, of our Weidenstephaner, German lager strain, we've tried all of the things. We tried wet yeast or liquid yeast for both those strains, and at least for what we're doing, we don't think there's a difference that we've noticed. So it's just easier for us to keep that on hand.
Now we're going to get into what I like to call the quick fire questions. So these are just, and I'd like for both of you guys to answer them. Just random questions, and they meant to be off the top of your head. What tip do you guys have for new brewers, home brewers just starting out? What is the best thing? Fermentation temperature obviously is a good one, but what's a tip you give to new home brewers starting out just to make the best beer possible?
Keep it clean.
Okay.
Like
sanitation.
That's the big thing, right? Is like we don't realize how clean things need to be, until you start, you're in the beer world, and then you're like, oh, like just because a hose like looks kind of clear,
visually clean,
doesn't mean that it's clean. So like, when you read a homebrew book and it says, hey, use whether it's PBW caustic or use some sort of caustic followed by a sanitizer like a Star San, sanitizer. Don't skip those steps.
Yeah.
they're there for a reason. Like you may, when you buy new hoses and gaskets or whatever, like that first batch may be good, but batch 2 is just like a train wreck, and I mean that's definitely happened to me as well. And at that point, it's better to either just like buy new hoses and then just say like, okay, like that's the penalty for not following your kind of cleaning procedures like to a T, because that's gonna make the difference between 3 weeks of waiting and your beer's good, or 3 weeks of waiting and your beer tastes like Band-Aids.
Yep. Sounds good. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. I would say if I were to the thing I feel like you taste in homebrew a lot is under attenuation. Mm-hmm. And what that stems from could be 1,000 things, but a very easy fix, or not a Band-Aid and maybe more, would be make sure you overpitch your yeast. If you're starting out and you go buy a homebrew kit and it comes with 1 packet of dry yeast, just buy another one.
Yeah.
They're not that expensive,
or learn how to do a starter.
How to do a starter. But if you're not even there yet, don't expect 1 vial to ferment. Get 2 vials, get 2 pouches, get 2 dry packets. Just you'll be surprised how much better your beer will be because you're throwing in the proper amount of yeast.
This next one, this is a question I always love to ask people. What's your desert island beer? And what that means is if you could only have one beer style for the rest of your life, what would that be? What's your favorite
style?
Your
or beer?
Let's go style, but then let's follow it up with beer too. So like, what is your favorite example of that style? So for me, I love pale ale. So Sierra Nevada pale ale.
I think I would have 2 different answers for those.
Okay, let's hear them.
I think Negra Modelo would be my desert island beer.
Okay.
It's just awesome and refreshing, and then you lighten it up with some lime, it's like changes the beer. It's awesome. But I think super dry San Diego West Coast IPAs would be the style. Just you get so much from those beers, and there's so many that style is kind of what brought me in a beer. And I love hops. We feel like with hazy IPAs we're going so over the top, and those beers are so good, but sometimes it's fun to go drink a super dry West Coast and remind yourself like, oh, we started here. This is where it all came from. It's really cool. At least where it came from for me.
Good answers. I'm gonna get 2 answers too now since Magic got 2.
Yep.
For style, I think it's just a good lager, right? It doesn't even matter what country it's from, whether it's the Czech Republic or Germany or Italy. Like just a good lager as a style. Like you could just drink those any time of the day, any part of the day, after anything that you're doing. To me, like
ABV,
lagers are they're just so pretty, and just like I love the nuance of so many different lagers. As for like one individual beer, I would probably choose Orval.
Good, yeah.
And Orval, I think, because one, like if you ever have Orval in Belgium, it's like it doesn't taste like Orval in America, right? It's like, this is just a nice like pale ale.
Yeah.
The hops are super crisp.
No Brett character
no
at that
Brett
point,
character whatsoever. So, if I'm stuck on an island, I'll drink Orval fresh when it tastes like a pale ale. Then over the course of my year, I'm stuck on that island. Then It's gonna get nice and bready and funky. I'm gonna love that too.
I love when I see Orval at places. I always go to check the date because I'm like, it changes. Yeah,
Give me the old warm one.
Give me the old warm one, and the Brett character is going to be in there. But the fresh one, like you said, when you're in Belgium, it's like, is it a hoppy pale ale? Yeah, it's just.
Never had it fresh, so yeah.
It almost feels like it's missing something. You're like, wait, where's the Brett? And you realize the Brett, develops after it's on a ship for 3 months. And then sits warm on somebody's shelf.
I mean, with all the shipping delays, it's probably like 6 months now.
That's true. Yeah,
I'm getting year-old Orval. It's fresh.
West Coast IPA or hazy IPA, and why?
Oh man,
I know you guys both make both of them.
Oh, magic! Come on.
Some people will.
So I will say, caveat to my answer, I think hazy IPAs are super fun to make. Because they're not as easy as people think they are to make, and trying to, get them to be super flavorful and differentiate them from other ones, and trying to showcase the hops is not as easy as people think it is. However, in terms of drinking, I'll drink a West Coast IPA all day. They're just dry, refreshing, where hazy IPAs are just like decadent desserts. A West Coast IPA is something, it's your daily bread. You can actually drink it all the time. They're drier, they're crisper, they're bitter, and especially now, as we've taken techniques from hazy IPA to West Coast IPA, the hop character is over the top now. So West Coast IPA.
I'm glad you touched on that. That they are. I think the stigma, especially when they first came out with hazy IPAs, was it's easy to make. Oh, it's lazy, but that's not the case. It is actually, from water profile. There's a lot of things that go into making a good hazy IPA. So I'm glad you touched on it. But I agree, West Coast IPA is probably my favorite to drink. Lester, same question.
Yeah. So I think my answer is similar, but I think with a little bit of context, I think hazy IPAs, at least in California, Northern California, really helped kind of pave the way of new developments and new growth in what hops and what IPA can be, right? I think you brought up Stone earlier, Arrogant Bastard and these 100 IBU beers, that turned a lot of people off to IPAs for a long time, right? These IBU wars are getting to 100 and that was a big bearded dude's badge of courage, but that turned so many people off to be like, oh, I don't like IPAs, right? And we're still kind of battling that a little bit, that people have in their heads that, oh, I don't like IPAs because they're so bitter. And I think that's the beauty of what hazy IPAs have done, is it began to turn the tide of, one, say, no, IPAs, just because they have a lot of hops, don't have to be bitter, and they can be juicy. But it also shepherded in a whole new, varietal set of hops from around the world that are just much more tropical and fruity and passion fruity than just piney. And so you brought a whole different flavor element and juicy elements that I think that's kind of what people needed to then begin to turn the tide and IPAs again. And like you said, now we can take those techniques from all the hazy IPA making, the juiciness, that really beautiful hop character, from all these beautiful hops that have come out in the last 5 years, and then move them back into a more familiar looking appearance package than before. And I feel as a whole the category is much broader and have more depth than ever before. And I think hazy's kind of helped usher that in. Long story short, though, I would prefer West Coast IPAs.
What do you guys think the next big beer style is? Cold IPA is a big thing right now. What do you guys see as the next big beer style, if any? Is there going to be something that creates its own lane and makes its way into the style guidelines even?
I think lagers are just going to get more and more popular.
I love that answer. Hopefully it's true.
I mean, we've been talking about it in the industry a lot, lagers, but I think now's the time. As homebrewers, right, there was so much stigma around it's so difficult to make, right? We were all scared to make it. I mean, even when we were at Barebottle in the initial years, we still didn't make it because we were all kind of afraid it's going to be so hard and it shows every flaw, and it's just yeah, but if you're a flawed brewer, then you're going to make flawed anything, not just lagers. But if you're clean and you have good procedures and processes, you're going to make clean anything, including lagers, and it's not that much different. But to me, I mean, I just think the more breweries, can make great lagers, and I mean, no knock on Kolsch. Kolsch is fine as a style, but I feel like once you have lagers and people are making good lagers, then you never go back to a Kolsch again,
Yeah.
Unless you're in Cologne, then for some reason they're magically amazing there. But I feel like lagers, instead of just being, we only have one lager on, I think we're going to start seeing in tap rooms, everyone's going to have like 2 or 3, and really start getting into the nuances of each kind of type of lager that you can have on the board, I think is
I'm glad you mentioned something about lagers and they're harder to make or less to hide behind. Like one of the things I always do when I go to a brewery is if they've got a blonde, a lager on tap, that's the beer I'm going to try because, like you said, there's nothing really to hide behind. You can do big stouts and things like that, even hoppy beers. There's a lot of hops, so that's always the beer I like to try to see their process and procedures to make sure they're making clean beer. So I love that. Magic, what do you think? Next big beer style? Or
I think I don't know if it's going to be a style, but the evolution of IPA even more than it already is. As we'll go taste some beers later that use enzymes to help with biotransformation and force the issue versus relying on technique. I think as more hop products come out, these CO2 hop extracts, terpenes, very specific yeasts that have been engineered to create certain fruit profiles. These things are going to completely transform what we think of as a normal beer and change our processes in brew houses. Maybe we won't need as many hops as we did before, or we'll get better yields from doing certain things. I think hops are, as we know them and the way they taste, are just going to continue to evolve. And like Hazy IPA was a perfect example. That didn't taste like hops did before. It tasted like a new thing. And even though there's way more hops in those beers than there ever were before, we used them in such a way that created these crazy fruit profiles. That's only going to we're just going to take that so much further. And I know Lester and I have talked about this. If we don't keep up with what's going on, we're just going to get left behind as these new things as IPAs in general continue to evolve.
I'm glad you mentioned the genetically modified yeast and the thiols and things like that they're producing.
Yep.
And one that I loved, I always loved, kettle sours. I think you guys do them too, and they're awesome. But yeah, like the yeast that's now been genetically modified to produce lactic acid, it's like great. I'm not babysitting a kettle for 2 days now.
Yep.
And what they're doing with the aroma compounds, like you said, with the thiols, it's amazing, and that's just going to continue to get better.
Yeah, research has only gotten, especially into hop products or hops, the thiols, the sulfur compounds. We could always read them, but it never got cheap enough for us to be able to do it in mass. And now that the companies it used to just be about oil content and terpenes, and you'd look at 2 hops, I'm like, they're exactly the same oils, but why do they taste so different? Yeah. As they're diving deep into what actually creates those aromas, and we're learning more and more, we're going to be able to really cherry pick what we want out of these hops and make black currant beers out of IPAs, or berries, or only passion fruit. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, the future's bright.
Yeah.
Well, thanks guys for letting us come in here talking about all this kind of stuff. The beer's amazing. Love the kit. Thank you guys. Cheers.
Cheers.